Okay, let's get this show going. Thank you everyone for joining. We're doing a series of webinars aimed primarily at state legislators and staff, but welcome to all members of the public on a wide variety of topics. Environment America and PIRG are holding these webinars. This is one of them. This one, we're going to focus on state policies that can help save the bees. Got a number of guests I'll introduce shortly. I'll first introduce myself. I'm Steve Blackledge. I'm the Conservation Program Director for Environment America. I'm based in California and have been working on bee issues for a very long time. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to focus on a couple things here. We're going to talk about what states have been doing already and states that have acted to help save the bees. And we're going to lean into two parts of the story. One is pesticides, and in particular, neonic pesticides or neonicotinoids that have been linked to bee deaths around the country. So we're going to talk about what states have done to limit and restrict the sale of neonics to help save the bees. And we're also going to lean into the story of habitat. So how do we protect the existing habitat that's out there? And how do we ensure that there's more habitat that is healthy and wild and good for bees? We're also going to have, and we have a number of speakers, we're going to end up with a Q&A. So if people have questions, you can type them into your Q&A chat here on the screen. So that's the run of show. So let's first talk about why states should protect the bees, and let's start with the importance of bees. So, and let's talk a little bit about bees in decline. So let's see, let's talk about bees in decline first. There are 4,000 native species of bees around the country, and many of them are in decline. So we have the rusty patch bumblebee was the first bee to be put on the endangered species list. The American bumblebee has seen its numbers drop by 90%, and it is a strong candidate, and we hope to see it soon covered by the endangered species list, or the Endangered Species Act, I should say. The Western bumblebee out west, as you might imagine, has seen its numbers drop really sharply, and in a recent count in California was entirely missing, as was another bumblebee, the Suckley's bumblebee. So all sorts of native bees in the US are in decline. And that's a problem. Also the honeybee. So the honeybee are used on farms, really important for agriculture. It's one of the things that first got the American public focused on the problem of bees, and that the honeybees are in decline as well. Colonies, there's the colony collapse disorder, and then farmers continue to lose more bees each year than they really can tolerate, and that's really sustainable for them. And so that has also focused, I think, a lot of the American public on the challenge of bees. And science points to four main things. One is pesticides. Two is loss and degradation of habitat. Three is climate change, which is a big one. And four is disease. So now let's talk a little bit. The other reason to focus on bees and why states are focused on bees is that they're so crucial. So 80 to 90% of all wild plants are pollinated by animal pollinators, and bees are the very best ones. And without bees, then whole ecosystems can go in decline because they're such critical pollinators. And thinking a little bit more selfishly, perhaps, food, as in the food we eat, is very much linked to bees as well. So more than 130 different fruits and vegetables are pollinated by bees. Alfalfa is pollinated by bees. And while we don't eat that, we do eat the dairy products that come from cows, and that is linked to alfalfa. So all sorts of things would be missing. In fact, we got a slide that focuses on an upcoming holiday, Thanksgiving, just a few weeks away or a couple weeks away, and all the things that would be we'd be at risk of losing without bees. So everything from the essential green bean casserole, which would be missing onions, sweet potato casseroles, wine, that one's important, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, you see the list. Thanksgiving without bees would be a challenge for all of us, and we'd have to totally change the meal. And of course, we're not willing to do that. So we're going to save the bees. All right, next slide. Okay, we're going to talk about two things today, the solutions, and we're going to lean into what states are doing, not just what they did, but how states actually helped to save the bees. Like what were the politics like? What did it take to win, et cetera? And we have a cast of speakers coming up. So we're going to lean into two topics. The first is ending the worst uses of pesticides and restricting pesticides that are killing bees. We're going to talk about what states are doing to limit and restrict neonics. And number two, we're going to talk about what states are doing to expand and protect habitats by planting pollinator-friendly, bee-friendly habitats on public lands. And the first one of these two, actually, before we get to our first two speakers, let's look at what's happened in just recent years. So go back 10 years and there were no policies in the states to restrict bees, the consumer use or sale of neonics, which kill bees. And now look at this. So this was a really fun, obviously it's dated because everyone has their COVID mask on. But this is the signing ceremony in Maine, which is one of the states that acted to restrict neonics. It all started in 2016 with Connecticut and Maryland. A few years passed, and Vermont followed suit. Maine came shortly thereafter, right in the middle of, well, in 2021, that's the photo here. That's the governor seated. One of those folks behind her is our advocate. The others are state legislators who were important in the bill. Contrary to what you might think from this photo, men did vote for the bill. They just didn't show up for the signing ceremony, it looks like. After Maine, there was Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, and I'll stop and pause there for a second and point out that those are all eastern states. So this was very much happening along the eastern seaboard. Then came Colorado. We have a speaker from Colorado, Danny Katz, director of COPIRG. And then came California just a few months ago, and we have Laura Dean from California. Okay, next slide. We're going to turn it over to Laura Dean. I don't know if she'd want me to say this. I believe it's her birthday. But we're going to turn it over to Laura Dean, and I won't sing, Laura Dean, to walk us through what it took to save the bees in California and what it took to pass our bill to restrict neonics.
Thank you so much, Steve. And yes, it is my birthday. So this is a great way to celebrate, to remember the work that we have been accomplishing all around the country, and then to share the story of what we did this year in California to help save the bees. And hopefully the bee behind me in the slide isn't too scary, but it's just representation of the little critters we're working to protect. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to reiterate some of the stuff that Steve already highlighted, and that is that bees are really essential to the entire web of life. They're really important, obviously, for our food system, but also for all of nature to be able to survive. So we have 4,000 native species of bee in the United States, and a lot of them are here where I live in California. We have 1,600 native bee species in our state alone. And almost 90% of the wild plants need animal pollinators. And as Steve said, bees are nature's best. But we're really concerned because the number of bees in the environment is declining. Reports are that now 1 in 3 native bees in California are actually at risk of extinction. So at risk of being wiped off the planet forever. And that poses a lot of threats to this web of life that we rely on. When we look at where the biggest threats are to our bees, one of the top culprits is pesticides generally, but in particular, an entire class of pesticides called neonicotinoids, which are insecticides that have been used all around the world. They're the main class linked to bee die-offs. They're a neurotoxin, so they attack the brains of the insects. And they're now the most widely used insecticide in the world, imidacloprid, which is one of the the neonics in the entire class of neonicotinoids. That is the most widely used pesticide in the world, and it's a neonic. So one of the things that we looked at was just how widespread is the problem of neonics getting into the environment, getting into our waterways and getting into, affecting wildlife. And there's this little screenshot here of a map that represents the neonics showing up in California water supplies. So I can link to that map in a moment if you want to take a deeper look. But we just found from our state's own Department of Pesticide Regulation, they test the water samples in lakes and rivers and streams all around the state. And we found that especially in urban areas, there was very high numbers. Down in central and southern California, we found neonics, or this particular neonic, imidacloprid, at levels that exceeded the EPA, the levels that would be extremely toxic to both bees and to other wildlife. And I mentioned that they're a neurotoxin, but they're extremely toxic is the thing to know. For bees, they're actually about 7,000 times more toxic than DDT, that was the infamous chemical from Silent Spring and the early environmental movement that was killing all the birds. So just 1 square foot of lawn that's treated with imidacloprid has enough of that pesticide to kill 1 million bees. So extremely toxic. They're not just harmful to bees, though. This neurotoxin has also been linked to significant harms to other wildlife, from fish to frogs to birds, also to deer. There was a recent study that found they're very harmful to deer. And then there's also new evidence that they pose significant harms to human health. So that was quite concerning. And we worked to put this map together to share with lawmakers in California and also with the broader public to just shine a light on the problem of these pesticides in the environment. So if we go to the next slide, I kind of lay out some of the historic actions that have been taken already to limit neonics in the environment, really because of the significant harms that they pose to bees and other wildlife. So the European Union is really far ahead on this, especially compared to the United States. They banned all spraying of neonics in 2018, and they've also banned the use of neonic-treated seeds in 2023. However, in the United States, there's been significant opposition from any actions to limit the use of bee-killing pesticides, especially from the ag and chemical companies, who really just don't want any rules around this. They want to be able to, do business as usual, and so they've blocked action. So in the next slide, I talk about how California fit into this. So obviously, California is really big. We're now the 5th largest economy in the world. And it's also an important state for agriculture. We're considered the fruit basket for America. We grow a lot of crops here. And as a result, the ag industry and chemical companies have been really powerful opponents on efforts to restrict the use of bee-killing pesticides or any kind of insecticides. They're a $50 billion industry in our state. They're also an important constituency. Farmers represent some of the most politically important parts of the state, like the Central Valley. And so what we wanted to do was really build bipartisan public support for a campaign to take meaningful action here in this big state in California to restrict the uses of bee-killing pesticides. And we did work on that last year. We worked with Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Kahan from the East Bay to introduce a bill that was modeled really on what they did in New Jersey and in Maine to restrict these bee-killing pesticides outside of ag. There already are restrictions on ag uses. The the Department of Pesticide Regulation has put in place some restrictions on neonic usage in farmlands, but we wanted to get rid of the worst uses, the unnecessary uses on lawns, on gardens, where oftentimes we found the public doesn't even realize that the products that they're using on, to grow their garden are actually killing the pollinators that they need. And so where we think we really need to just get rid of these bee killing pesticides completely. So last year, after we had built a lot of public support, the governor unfortunately vetoed the bill. However, he did promise that his agency would take action in 2023. Coming into this year, we were hopeful that we would see the Department of Pesticide Regulation follow the governor's direction and take action, but as the year progressed, we didn't see anything happening. And so in the spring, Environment California worked, and other groups like NRDC, a lot of other partners, worked with Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Kahan to introduce two bills. One of them is AB 363, and we'll send you a link to the legislative record on that bill. And that's the one that was really following the earlier bill. So once again, restricting the use of bee-killing pesticides outside of ag. And then the other bill, AB 1042, was a new idea to tackle a huge loophole when it comes to, neonics and other pesticides in the environment, which is that commonly seeds that are being planted in the soil are now routinely treated with pesticides before they're ever planted. Even if those pesticides aren't needed, it's like prophylactic action to prevent pesticides. Prevent pests. However, often there's not necessarily evidence that they're needed or helpful, and that is we think a major source of neonics and other pesticides getting into the environment and threatening bees. So we wanted to address that issue as well. And so we did a lot of organizing. The next slide shows some of the work that we did around the state. Environment California runs a citizen outreach canvassing operation, and in the summer when we can scale up and have a lot of young people come join us. And so we focused this past summer on 2023 on building support to save the bees all around the state. And we had conversations with thousands of residents in the community about threats to the bees and the opportunity to save them by restricting unnecessary use of neonics. And one thing I'll underscore from these conversations is we found saving bees is very popular. This is the campaign that has gone the best for us out of any other environmental issue, which is pretty significant because we've been canvassing on environmental issues for decades in the state. But people love bees, and they think they understand why they're so important for our ecosystems. And then in the next slide, you'll see we also, brought a lot of that public support to the state capitol. This is a photograph of a bunch of our canvassers and volunteers and student activists gathered, some dressed up in bee costumes, gathered at the state capitol, in front of the capitol, with our state legislative champ, Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Kahan, calling on legislators to pass the bills to save the bees. And one thing I'll also share is that the bill was really broadly supported in the state legislature. We did have some bipartisan support. And I think that was in part because of the broad coalition we were able to build. And there were, both environmental groups that care about conservation and wildlife, but we also had public health groups. We worked closely with the Native Plant Society here in California, who have lots of community members who care about healthy biodiversity in the community. And so together we were able to build a lot of public interest support, which really helped to cut against the opposition. Now, even though the bill did not affect ag use of these chemicals of neonics, the bill to limit the neonics outside of ag use. This was really targeted at the consumer sale of neonics and the use by pesticide applicators, like professional applicators. And so even though it was limited, we still found tremendous opposition lining up against the bills once again this year, from the ag industry and from the chemical industry. And it really seemed like, because our bill was addressing this particular use of these chemicals, that it threatened all uses in their mind or something. It was kind of like that. They didn't want to let the camel's nose under the tent, right? They didn't want to risk any action that could regulate the use of these chemicals, was how it seemed to be where that opposition was coming from. And so that was what I really needed to mount that support, popular support in the community, and public education around the issue, as well as that coalition of broad supporters. And so by doing that, we were able to get the bill through the legislature once again, and in large part because our champ really worked hard to get her colleagues to vote for it. And then the big question was, is Governor Newsom, who had vetoed a very similar bill the year before, is he going to be able to sign the bill? And I think one thing that we did a better job of the second year was working with the governor's own agency and with the staff in his office, to make sure that we had amended the bill to kind of fit and address their concerns. So the final bill that we passed does completely ban the consumer sale of these bee-killing pesticides. So we think it's going to really it's going to result in a big reduction in neonic usage across the state of California when it goes into effect in January 2025. But it also gives that kind of directs the Department of Pesticide Regulation to evaluate and put out regulations on the pesticide applicator uses. That was where there was the most kind of questions about, okay, what do we do with invasive pests? And after all of that, the last slide here for my section, the next one is, we got the governor to sign the bill. So that was awesome. We thanked the Governor Newsom for really standing up for bees and for all of nature and all of wildlife by signing AB 363. But I wrote here, this made California the 10th state to limit neonics in these non-ag uses, but the campaign is definitely not completely over yet to save the bees. And one of the big areas that we're continuing to work on, we still have that bill I mentioned earlier, to limit or to close the big loophole affecting seeds, so that any pesticide treated seeds also have to get tracked and have limitations on their uses by the state of California. That bill is a 2-year bill, so it's still in the midst of the legislative process, and we're really hopeful we can see action on that issue this upcoming session in 2024. So that's it for me, and I think over to Danny Katz.
Super, Laura. Thank you.
Back to you, Steve.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Thank you very much. Nate Regal from Pennsylvania, I'm going to give you a partial respond to your question with a partial answer. And then Laura, there's a question in the chat specifically directed at you from Susan that you can respond to now or at some point soon. I know that Danny potentially had a conflict come up. Danny, are you with us to cover Colorado? And if not, I will do so briefly.
And then maybe, I can just answer that quick question from Susan.
Yeah.
AB 363 does not address neonics in indoor uses like flea or tick treatments. It was really focused on the consumer sale of these garden lawn products. So, the stuff that you buy at Home Depot for your yard. And I'll put a few links into the chat, including the map that I shared and also the bill links, if folks want to take a look at what happened in California.
Right. Okay. I'm going to cover briefly. I want to get to habitat. I'm just going to talk briefly about Colorado because it was interesting in that Colorado was the first non-Eastern state to take action. This is a photo with Governor Polis seated, Danny Katz on the left, standing right in front of him is Len Montgomery from Environment Colorado, other advocates and folks who were supportive of the bill. I'm just going to mention a couple things and then we'll move on. So this is a bill that it will limit the sale of pesticides. They found a slightly different, every state's slightly different in how they handle it. Most states have tackled this from a restricted use, like to make neonics a restricted use, which essentially means that that you have to have a pesticide license to purchase and apply or use neonics. So that's one of the key tools that states have used. Maine went further and prohibited neonic use in the sale, but also the use in all landscaping. So Maine went further in that regard, and I believe New Jersey did as well in their law. Colorado had a limited use bill. The governor was supportive right from the get-go. The governor's spouse was a key champion of the bill from the get-go. That was quite helpful and useful for us. And Colorado became the 9th state, and like I say, the first non-Eastern state to take this action. California, of course, followed suit to make it the 10th. Next slide. Just a few things here. Media. We were able to generate media in support of the bill, held events like the one that you see from the photo above, and then held a webinar similar to this one right here to build support for the bill, all of which was aimed at, we knew that the public was generally supportive. We wanted to make sure that they knew there was a bill in play and to engage them. We did that. Like we said, we had some key champs in all the right places, and we're able to move this bill forward in Colorado and win as well. All right, next slide. All right, now we're going to move the tassel over from pesticides to talk about habitat. Obviously, those things are linked. We want the habitats that we are working to protect to be as pesticide-free as we can. First, I want to quickly mention roadside habitat. A lot of states have done this. I'm just going to name a few, but there are a whole bunch. So North Carolina, Kentucky, Minnesota, California, and others have passed policies that incentivize or direct or encourage state departments of transportation to plant bee-friendly, pollinator-friendly vegetation along roadsides. And there's 10 million acres of roadside habitat in the US, and they stretch on and on and on. Just imagine like a road that, in a flat terrain, and it just keeps going. And so in a sense, these roadside habitats are sort of like, or they are, I should say, wildlife corridors in which you can stretch habitat on for a long ways. So bee-friendly vegetation, reduced mowing, reduced or no pesticides, those are the key pieces of these state bills. And then I want to say just briefly, and I want legislators on the call and their staff to know, the federal bipartisan infrastructure bill also included, by federal standards, a fairly small pot of money, several million, to provide grants to states to implement their roadside pollinator habitat programs. And that can be for states who already have passed laws or states who haven't. So that program is available once Congress appropriates the money. We're working to make sure that happens. And as it's structured, states can receive grants up to $150,000. I don't know if that's per state or per project, but that's the size of the grants that we're looking at. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie to introduce our Ellie from. Oh, let me actually say one more thing on the habitat. Thank you for the slide. These things are beautiful. These roadsides are beautiful. And so having grown up in the 70s and 80s where everything was just grass and mowed, like when you look at the photos of these roadsides, they're beautiful. And politically, I think there's an argument that, this is a winner. It saves the bees, number one, but it provides beauty in our lives and along our roadsides. And so you can just Google around, and these were two of many, many, many photos I found just Googling about just how beautiful these roadsides can be. Okay, Ellie, why don't you introduce our Virginia guest, and we'll talk more about habitat.
Yes, thank you, Steve. My name is Ellie Bamer-Wilson. I am the State Director for Environment Virginia, and I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. Thomas Smith is our next speaker, and we'll be talking about the progress that Virginia has made in not only protecting pollinators, but focusing on native species and the benefit that they have for conservation in general. So I'll hand it over to them to talk about their work there.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Pleasure to be here with everybody today. My name is Tom Smith. I've been working in conservation biology efforts here in Virginia for the last 33 years, mostly with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. Retired last year, and now serve as a volunteer with the Virginia Native Plant Society. Here in Virginia, we have always approached the native plant issue in combination with our long-term battle with invasive species. And so we've always approached these two in conjunction with one another, starting off back in the early 90s with trying to recommend good natives as alternatives to invasives that were being sold in the commercial trade as one example. So people always ask, what is native? We're fortunate here in Virginia to have our own Flora of Virginia, and that is a great resource for all the work we do. In North America, plant species are generally described as native if they occurred here prior to European settlement. The distinction's made because of the large-scale changes that have occurred since the arrival of European settlers. Native plant species have evolved with specific regions and been dispersed throughout their range without known human involvement. Native plants form the primary structure of the living landscape and provide food and shelter for our native animal species, including migratory birds and pollinators. Increasing the amount of native vegetation in our home regions can accomplish many goals, like protecting water quality, increasing carbon dioxide absorption, enhancing wildlife habitat, and improving aesthetics and the quality of life. Native plants not only offer many practical, low-cost, and environmental benefits, they also offer an appealing display of foliage and flowers. You just need to know what to look for. And I'll speak to that in a couple of minutes. Right, it's always essential to know what you've got before you can get people to love it. Really, I'll say not until 2014 did we at the Virginia Natural Heritage Program start to take a serious look at bees. No one could tell you, no one could tell you how many bees there were in the state of Virginia. Like, no one knew. And so we thought we need to figure this out. So we've had an intensive bee inventory going on since 2014. We've got 481 species of bees identified in the state to date. 461 of those are native, 20 are exotic. We figure we probably have somewhere around 500 we get there. The Natural Heritage Program is tracking data specifically on 19 species that are considered rare. It was mentioned earlier, the rusty patch bumblebee is the one federally listed bee that we have in Virginia. We've got 6 species of bees that are globally rare. So they're not federally listed, and they're not just rare in Virginia. They're rare on a global basis. So we're getting a good handle on what's going on with our bees. Native plants, some of the sort of direct benefits. They provide visual beauty year-round. Many native plants are referred to as 4-season plants because they have interesting characteristics in each season. Local native plants support more wildlife species than non-native plants. Native trees, shrubs, and vines that feed the insects, birds, and animals are essential for maintaining our biodiversity. Local native plants are adapted to local temperature and rainfall fluctuations. And once you've got native plants established, if you're doing a planting, they often require less watering compared to non-native species, saving natural resources, time, and importantly, money. So a few quick examples of our efforts here in Virginia to promote the use of native species. One is the Virginia Pollinator SMART program. So this was designed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation's Natural Heritage Program in concert with our Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, which is the agency that regulates the permitting of solar farms. So this is designed to encourage large commercial solar farms to use natives under and around their panels. It's simply a good practice, and it's helping to drive an increase in the availability of local native plant sources, which is a real problem in restoration projects, is having a greater source. So this is driving greater availability of native plants. And this effort also includes something called the Virginia Native Plant Finder, which is an online tool that allows really anybody to use the Virginia Native Plant Finder. You can go through a checklist of what kind of characteristics are you looking for, and then it'll give you and what region you're in, and it'll give you a list of native plants that meet those characteristics. And maybe most importantly, it tells you where they're commercially available, so you can purchase those things. So, another great program is called Plant Virginia Natives. It's an effort to promote the use of native plants really at the local level. So there are 10 different regional partnerships around the state that have focused on marketing native plants. So drawing attention to how attractive native plants can be, what are the sources within your region, what are the best plants for your region, and how to purchase and get those planted. So Plant Virginia Natives has been very popular. And so now I think we're to the slide that's up here dealing with sort of legislative issues. So in the 2023 Virginia General Assembly session, we got 2 bills passed that are going to help us advance our conservation efforts. Where did these come from? A lot of work by a lot of people, but 2 key folks, Glenda Booth and Betsy Martin. They're both very active with conservation efforts in their local region in Northern Virginia. They worked with their local legislators, Paul Kriesek, who introduced House Bill 1998, and Delegate David Bulova, who introduced House Bill 2096. House Bill 1998, Delegate Kriesek's bill, amends Virginia's original invasive species bill to now include natives and calling on state agencies to prioritize the use of natives, specifically for the Secretaries of Natural and Historic Resources, Agriculture and Forestry, and Secretary of Administration to coordinate the development of actions to be taken by state agencies to, 1, identify state properties that are appropriate to restore natural communities and native species habitats, to encourage all state agencies to prioritize native plants and trees when planting or propagating on state properties, and 3, to provide guidance to state agencies that manage state property to restore degraded habitats and plant more natural communities and use native species. The second bill, Delegate Bulova's bill, House Bill 2096, calls for a state list of invasive plants. So we have a state list of invasive plants, but it's going to have some teeth behind it now because it'll be updated every 4 years, and it will prohibit any state agency from planting, selling, or propagating any plant that is on that invasive species list. So a major step forward for us. One important piece of that bill is in working with the Farm Bureau and Agribusiness Council to sort of get these things through, it simply modified the definition of move in the invasive species bill. So farmers get a free pass if they accidentally move something that's on the invasive species list with baling hay or whatever. But how were we successful? Our previous efforts had really focused on trying to promote natives and eliminate invasive species by eliminating them from the trade. So that generated a lot of opposition from the nursery community. You know, for example, we were trying to get just Bradford pear as one example, just a non-starter. They are very powerful entities within our state, and that was not going to happen given the makeup that we've had with our state legislature. So we're happy that these 2 bills are through. You think it will be a good start, and lots of work for state agency staff to do, because of course no new money came with any of these mandates, but they've got to get to work on that. And we just had an election in Virginia, so we have a different makeup in our General Assembly. We'll see what the 2024 session brings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for Virginia's leadership. I want to get the Q&A. I just a couple wrap-up notes. One is that, as you heard, the list of states being highlighted at some point in this webinar varied politically from, blue states to red states to purple states. So we highlighted Virginia, Colorado, California, Maine, Kentucky, North Carolina, Minnesota. So a lot of states are acting, and there's there's a lot, and there's momentum, both when it comes to regulating or addressing pesticides that kill bees, but also when it comes to habitat. A couple of reasons why I think there's momentum. One, there's the public is behind this. So the public is behind this. This is the politics of this are good, and there's a committed base of environmentalists who will be active on this issue. As Laura said earlier, people really get engaged in Save the Bees efforts. Two is that there are model bills out there now. So we can look at states that have restricted neonics. We can look at states that have enhanced or created new habitat or incentivized new habitat as models. So look at Virginia on habitat. Look at what Kentucky's doing on roadways. Look at what Maine and California and others are doing to save the bees from limiting pesticides. And I'm going to put an article into the chat. Whoops. Sorry, let me try that again. That will list again the 10 states that have acted, so that you can go and look at those bills. And then the third reason why the politics of this are good is that there are organizations that will back up state legislative efforts. So groups like ours and our state affiliates, Environment America, and our state affiliates like Environment California and Environment Virginia, NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, Xerces Society, which is an invertebrate group that focuses solely on invertebrates, native plant societies are wonderful and have been involved. Bird groups, because of the damage to birds from neonics, have been engaged. So there's a lot of support out there for this to continue to expand the map in terms of states that have acted. So with that, let me see if there are any other questions that we have. It looks like there might be one. Oh, Jane had a question and I answered it, but let me just, wouldn't pollinator vegetation along roadways lead to some of the bugs getting hit by cars? And the answer is yes. But, and the but is, all the scientists have told me, because I had that same question and have had it, is that the benefits are going to far outweigh the damage. So there will be some roadkill of butterflies and bees. There are ways that you can limit that by choosing the best highways, slower moving, or highways that have ditches or right of ways that kind of are further from the road. But the benefits outweigh the damage. Tim asks, what's happening in Indiana? I don't know the answer, Tim, but I think it's an excellent question. We'll dig on that after this. There you go. And Susan asked, legislation for nursery use. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if any of our other guests do.
I can share that my understanding is that nurseries, whatever the things that they're selling, count as ag uses. That is it's part of agricultural uses. And so if you wanted to restrict it, it would need to be also restricting ag uses. So they're generally exempted from these consumer limitations. I haven't heard of anyone actually tackling that specific use, but I think that's another really good idea, because I think it's something that people aren't aware of again, and that they might be inadvertently planting neonics in their garden. And to your point, if a nursery owner would go out of business if they're not selling the plants, we should try to get that to happen everywhere, so that they're, leveling the playing field, kind of thing.
And Nate asked about executive orders. I do know, Nate, I'm going to give you a half answer for the second time in a row. One is that agency action has been another tool that has been used. So in Massachusetts, for example, there was legislation, but ultimately it was the state agency that acted before the legislation got across the finish line. In California, as Laura said, the governor initially vetoed the bill, saying it seemed to him that it'd be better addressed through administrative action. When that didn't happen, we came back again with a bill and legislation. I think that certainly on habitat, there's a lot of opportunity for executive orders to address planting of bee-friendly, pollinator-friendly vegetation in the yards of government buildings, along roadways, along levees, all sorts of places you can do that. Let's see. Other questions? That's great to know about UK plant life. Thank you, Sam. Resolutions to lead off with bills. I think it's smart. And and Nate, you're asking as a Pennsylvanian, and that may be the way to go in Pennsylvania. So many states have different roadmaps. I know a lot of states, they start with study bills that start to answer key questions that then lead to legislation 1 or 2 years later. Other states may start with resolutions. Other states may start with a bill that doesn't get out of the legislature the first year or two, and that's really common, or 3. Our experience, again, is because of the public support for this, even if it fails in the legislature, even if it fails in the first committee, a lot of these places where we've won, we've just kept coming back to it because there is broad public support to save the bees. I don't mean to answer all the questions. If other guests want to tackle them, please jump in. I know there was a question, and maybe we'll conclude with this. There was a question about farming. Laura mentioned that in fact, all 10 of the bills that have passed in the states have been about restricting the sale and use so ordinary consumers don't inadvertently or intentionally buy neonics that kill bees, and therefore people with pesticide applicators licenses or other licenses can or permits can still do this. That largely exempts ag. That is both politically strategic to ensure that we can actually win on something. But I should also add, it's also smart in the sense that our urban areas, because of all the diversity of flowering plants that we see in our cities and urban areas and suburbs, are actually incredibly important for bees. And I know there's an old study, it's 20 some years old now, by the US Fish and Wildlife Service that said lawns are actually more toxic than farmland. So again, that's a very old study, may not be the case anymore, but it does warrant attention to consumer sale and to urban areas. And then on top of that, we do need to restrict pesticides and neonics in ag settings. And a lot of states may have options. I also think the US Farm Bill is an opportunity to incentivize the more sustainable farming options out there. While I was talking, I wasn't paying attention to new questions that have come in, but Laura or others, are there new questions that we need to answer?
Let's see. So Joel's asking, will the webinar be available again to watch? And yes, absolutely. In fact, we've been recording, and so we will share a recording of the webinar, and we'll also be posting that on the event website. And then Christine asks a similar question about the resources, whether we can email out the various links and resources that were provided in the webinar. And absolutely, we'll provide all of those links right afterward.
Great. Yeah, and we've got the list of all the emails of everyone who joined us. And thank you again for joining us, legislators, lawmakers, staff, and other guests. We're happy to have all the other guests come on to learn more about what states are doing to save the bees. And if you have questions, there's my email address right there. I think I also sent a reminder email, I think, to everybody who's on here, and we'll include that when I send out the resources after this call. Thanks again, everyone.